Welcome to the Undiscovered Gems podcast, hosted by NBA legend and business powerhouse Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds.
All right, welcome to Undiscovered Gems, and I'm the host, Charles Smith, and I'm here with co-host today, the incomparable Brandon Steiner. If you don't know Brandon Steiner, you will know by the end of this show, and if you just Google him, this gentleman has been the industry's best at sports memorabilia. He's created a monster company from it, and I'm actually excited to have him as a co-host today. But who are we interviewing? The great Philip Greenberg. Philip has been many times the top matrimony lawyer in the state of New York. His information and his 40 years of experience in this industry is unmatched. Stay tuned as we talk to Philip and find out all the latest and greatest that's happening in the world of matrimony. And he's been on before. We're glad to have him back. And Philip, Brendan, how are you guys today?
I'm doing great. I'm interested to see what Philip has to talk about because, boy, I just cannot believe how many people just cannot seem to get along. Yeah. And maybe he's got some advice of how we can avoid and maybe force them to be slightly unemployed. Would be interesting. Like, what can we do to get along better?
So let me just tell you. Can I call you Brandon, by the way?
Of course.
Yeah, so Brandon, I just want you to know that if we could find a way to get a lot less people divorced and, as you said, partly put me out of business, that's fine. Because what you and Charles don't know is I have a fallback. I can always go back to being a bellboy. So it was the best job I ever had. So, so the plan B, I will admit, the plan B is not as lucrative as being a divorce lawyer, but it's zero stress. So it doesn't bother me. I'm more than happy to give you advice. Is that what you want me to start with?
So no, Brandon just brought up a good segue talking about why can't we get along. Sure. I'll ask you, Philip, in all your cases and your experience, is it communication? What is it that kind of tips it off? Is it lack of communication?
So this is Greenberg's view of it. And I may have mentioned it to you before, I'm not sure, but I was doing a cable show quite a few years ago, and it was called Bugged. And it was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, and it was live, by the way. Even though it was being taped, it was also being shown in real time on cable. And the host, who was divorced himself, said, "Hey, what's the main cause of divorce? Ha ha, infidelity." And I thought about it. Oh, by the way, I've been a lawyer 50 years, not 40, but who's counting? So I thought about it for a moment, and I said, no, I think that the main reason why people get divorced is they were mismatched from the beginning. And I don't get me wrong. I know that, and a typical person getting divorced may say to you, oh, we grew apart, or what, if you want a crazy case, I didn't know he was already married to someone else. I actually had a couple like that. That's obviously a big problem. In other words, they weren't divorced from their previous. And sure, things sometimes do happen. Families interfere. I mean, things do happen. But I think that in most cases, I have no studies. This is purely anecdotal. I really think that the couples were mismatched. And so many of them, when they're getting divorced, you look at them and say, I could never picture these two people being together. And as I said on that show, which I'll say to you now, is I think a lot of people, especially younger people, but not just younger people, mistaken physical attraction and chemistry for love. And then once that petters down, that's all they've got. And that's what I think. And in terms of communication, and again, Charles, you asked me, so maybe you're only getting it from Greenberg, this Greenberg's view. And this is kind of sound a little tongue-in-cheek. I think that, again, anecdotally, the problem is that couples communicate too much. They really don't like a lot of times what gets them starting on a divorce process is they start listening to each other and they don't like what they hear. And so again, that's just from my experience. So I really don't think that a lack of communication. Of course, couples. And by the way, I'm happily married, and I believe you two gentlemen. You don't have to answer. I believe you two gentlemen are happily married too. Um, so and it's my first marriage for me and my wife. So yeah, we communicate, but
Are we lucky though? Are we lucky that we're all happily married? Is it luck? Is it something that we've done in particular? Like, what do you tell people? What would you tell people at the beginning of their marriage, knowing what you know, that maybe can prevent maybe a problem down the road?
okay.
Well, before you answer that, Philip, I did get a
That was
divorce
a good
about five
question.
years ago,
Oh,
but
oh,
it's all good. It's all
oh,
good.
I'm
oh.
Now you can
35
answer
years in
Brandon.
counting,
Now you
so
can answer Brandon's question.
Yeah,
I'm
so
35 years in counting. But listen, staying married for this length of time, I'm sure when they came up with the idea of marriage, they didn't
sure.
think we are going to live this long.
That's right.
Living with somebody for 50 years is not easy.
Yeah.
But tell me if you can answer my question. I mean,
Well, I
what do you
can.
what do you
Well,
tell young people that could avoid us having even this conversation?
I'm glad you asked me that question. I once I'll tell you what I think, and only from the man's view, because and maybe this is not politically correct, but I've only been a man in my life, and so I'm really just looking from the man's view, and my view of the husband's role, if he wants to stay married and he stay happily married, is what they say in the Air Force. You have to earn your wings every day. And maybe it's a little cynical, but it works for me, and I think it works for most happily married men. You have to get that if you did this, this, and this for your wife yesterday, and she may have appreciated it, you got to earn your wings again today, and you're going to have to earn them again tomorrow. And because I already did some stuff for my wife today, she really appreciated it because she was very stiff. So I walked the dog, and even though I had just come back from the gym and it was early and I was rushing, and she really appreciated it. But tomorrow, I got to earn my wings again. So I think that when men, especially men, are about to get married or just got married, that's my biggest piece of advice is earn your wings every day, and if you do, um, you're really increasing your chances of.
Because
Good.
women are always going to earn their
Advice.
wings instinctively. They're always going to do more than men. The way
Well,
I see it.
don't get me started.
I mean, we're never going to do in a day what a woman does in a day. And if you start measuring up who's doing what, like we're never doing as much as what a woman does in a day. It's not going to
well,
happen.
well, I don't, I don't quite agree, but I won't delve into it anymore, except that I will quote Professor Higgins from My Fair Lady. When he was talking about men, he said, by and large, we are a magnificent sex. And I'll go by that. So
Okay.
uh,
So,
yeah.
so Philip, with that being said, there's this new term that seems to
Mhm.
be in the industry, getting divorced for lack of commitment, as a term. No, they don't talk about infidelity or,
Mhm.
for financial reasons, it's lack of commitment. Is that a real term? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think that's a misnomer. I think that lack of commitment is usually what results in people not getting married. The big complaint of women, of men, and by the way, I was a confirmed bachelor into my 40s, is I had, quote, a fear of commitment. So I think what you're thinking about is the modern terms. We do have no fault divorce in all 50 states now. In New Jersey, they call it irreconcilable differences. And actually, the first divorce I handled under the new New Jersey law about 15 years ago, you'll definitely understand why there were irreconcilable differences. And New York in 2010 adopted what they call irretrievable breakdown. So that's kind of in the same ballpark as lack of commitment. It's a way that you can get divorced where it's not anybody's fault. Irreconcilable differences, which I, by the way, because I'm kind of a linguist, I think there's something contradictory there because irreconcilable differences, you can never reconcile. Differences by definition are irreconcilable. But okay, I'm not the one who wrote the New Jersey law. I'm just practicing New Jersey and New York. And irretrievable breakdown in New York makes, I think, more sense. And you could tell from that, Charles, you're not blaming anybody. When you say that the marriage is irretrievably broken down, you're just saying you don't get along. You may even be both great people. And sometimes, and by the way, if I start to bore you guys, I'll change the subject. Just a quickie, because I think
you're depressing me. I don't know about boring, but
oh no, no, there's nothing to be depressed. You're happily married.
I just think about the subject matter and just the amount of there's so much spousal differences. The 911 calls, the where men and women aren't getting along, men are threatening women, and it's at an all-time high.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the divorce is really just the end of the road of it all. But and I just feel like it's got to be something we got to do. And I feel like our younger men right now are struggling.
They
to
are
find their place and how to treat women and how to get relationships going. So we're seeing women, twice as many of them graduate from college than men. Almost 2.5 times as many women will have a house under their name than a man.
Mm-hmm.
The dating, the commitment level is at an all-time low with men. With women are just and there's the women from a work standpoint and success. So I'm worrying about how do we get underneath the hood with our young men to get them more confident and learn how to handle and treat women appropriately is my biggest concern, because domestic violence is at all-time high. It's got to get minimized, and we got to minimize divorce because it ends up putting out crappy kids. You end up screwing your kids up when you're in domestic violence or when you're in really bad marriages. Not every marriage is going to make it. Doesn't mean your kids are going to be screwed up, but a lot of times marriage gets so bad and then you end up with bad kids, and it's like a spiraling. Sure. So I love this topic.
Right. Well,
right. No, it is sort of on topic, Philip, what Brandon said. So with all that Brandon just mentioned, and you said irreconcilable differences, where have you seen and how do you reconcile when it's at that point with domestic violence, all the things that Brandon mentioned? How do you resolve that? I mean, you've had a lot of cases. Have you been in situations where it was really bad and you kind of dealt with them and they got back together?
Well, the answer is yes and no. I have helped not that many, but I have helped some couples that wanted to get divorced to get back together again. In fact, I always, at my initial consultation, and I got to tell you, some people don't appreciate it because they didn't go to a divorce lawyer to hear, try to work things out. But I always pursue the possibility of reconciliation. But I will tell you this, and I'm a divorce lawyer. By the way, I also do other stuff like corporate, but my bread and butter is matrimonial. But it is very some marriages, gentlemen, just have to be buried, and I had, Charles and I, this is our third webinar, Brandon, that I've done with Charles, and plus I've met him in person because he's terrific. Previously, I was in partnership with one of the deans of the matrimonial bars, Lester Woolman, retired and then deceased, and he frequently did refer people who wanted to get divorced to marriage counselors. And he was a little cynical about it. And I'd be interested to know about other people who've had marriage counselors. That his feeling was the only thing a marriage counselor does is teach people how to be miserable together. So you gotta, you have to, there are separations. And again, I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a shrink. Some marriages, the best thing that you can do, it's just like, and maybe this is a morbid comparison, but when a patient is terminal, all you can do is make them comfortable. And
Mm.
some marriages, and I'm telling you, I mentioned to, I know I mentioned earlier, maybe off camera, that I'm getting ready for a big divorce trial in November and December, and it's a marriage that absolutely is not salvageable. Is not
Mm.
salvageable. And so it would really be cruel to make these people have to stay married. They don't live together anyway, but to make them stay married on paper and not be able to get on with their life. I do think that, and as I say, I have helped to save a few marriages. I think that some couples, it's a rough patch. It may be the economy, it may be a difficult child or a special needs child, and frankly, a lot of times it's interference by their families, usually the parents, and a couple that would otherwise be okay, but they're getting a lot of interference from the families. And
Mm.
so sometimes those things can be worked out. But I just point them to, I have a family counselor that I've known. He's a therapist and family, and I've known him since college. He's been a family therapist since the late 70s. And I've referred a lot of people to him. And more or less, when I felt that it was salvageable, and I'm still in touch with him. And as far as I know, every couple that I've referred to him are still together. So
Mm.
it's possible. But to answer your original idea, Brandon, because I don't want to ignore you, especially because you and I are the boys from Flatbush on this call. Thank you, thank you. I go back to what I said before, and you're absolutely right. Um, Unfortunately, there were a lot of young men who were really lost, and it is a problem, partly because the old days, most of the people graduating from college were men. Now it's women, and the women as breadwinners, and that's a societal problem, at least in this country. And I don't really have any good answers for it, at least not on a short term basis. But I go back to what I said at the beginning of the show. The biggest thing that you can do to help couples to avoid a bad marriage and a divorce is to make sure to tell them, to advise them, they have to be really careful about who they marry.
And
And they
why?
have to try to separate. And listen, all three of us were young. Of course, you guys were young more recently, a lot more recently than I was. I know what it's like to be passionate about, a person of the opposite sex. It is hard. It is really hard to separate sometimes. It's, oh, I'm so in love with her, and blah, blah, blah. And it's really just a physical attraction. And, really to tell people to step back. And actually, this is not the topic for today, prenuptial agreements, but I do a lot of prenuptial agreements. And not many, but some couples during the prenuptial agreement process, where they talk about, oh, what religion the children are going to be, or how many children they're going to have, and who, if either of them is going to stop working to care for the children. Sometimes, in fact, I hate to say it, not often enough in the prenup process, they realize that they're not meant for each other and they don't get married. And the reason I say it doesn't happen enough, I don't know how much time I have, but the reason I say it doesn't happen enough is that I've gone through prenups where it was, it's not my job to tell someone don't get married. But from the process, and I'll just try to do this real quick. So I had a couple come in. The man was being represented by another lawyer, but very often because of my location in my office, 34th and Park is very convenient. So a lot of times they sign here. I notarize both. If there's a problem, the other lawyer is available. And so I was in this room, and he had assigned the prenup. They were getting married in 2 days. And I was on the phone with the other lawyer. It was a time of year when the air conditioning was going. It was very loud. And every time I left the room and talked to the room's lawyer, it sounded like they were arguing. But my air conditioner was very noisy. So I said, I think there may be a problem. Let me put the phone down. Let me go back in. Came in there, sitting there calmly the way we're sitting here now. Everything okay. Everything is fine. I'd go back. Same thing. This happened a few times. I'd stop the call with the other lawyer, say, it sounds like they're fighting in there. And I'd go back in. They said, no, everything's fine. And then they signed the agreement and left with their copies. And my wife, it was in the evening, my wife just happened to be working at my secretary's desk. And she said, Philip, did you know that every time you left the room, they started fighting? And so that wasn't, a good segue for a couple that was getting married in 2 days. And I won't go.
I always say great agreements prevent disagreements.
Mhm.
And I don't know why more people need to get to the prenup stage before they go over the list of the questions. Only my wife, we went over a list of 50 questions before I even moved in with her. And I'd known her for a long time already at that point. Religion, kids, where do you want to, do you want to live in the city, the burbs, all that stuff. Like, we pretty much were good with about 48 out of the 50, with two minor issues that were really not that big a deal. But I'm amazed how many kids don't even talk about the fact that I don't even want kids or that kind of thing. That's a big marriage breaker upper. One wants kids, the other one doesn't. How many kids you have, where you're going to live, how much emphasis is going to be on work, money, how important is it, the lifestyle. Like, get that out on the table. Like,
sure. Well, that's Brandon. You're wise beyond your years, Brandon. And as I told,
more lucky.
Oh, lucky, yeah. As I told, actually, I know I told this one to Charles in our last webinar, but since you brought it up, I just want to tell you about one of my divorces in New Jersey, which exactly proves what you just said. I had a couple in New Jersey, nice, young, still attractive. They lived together, then they got married. They were getting along great. They still loved each other. So why were they getting divorced? Now, I'm glad you asked me that, Brandon. Because now that they were getting along so well, they agreed now it's time to start having children. And she said, definitely, let's have children. They both wanted children. Definitely, let's have children. And of course, they'll be raised Catholic. And he said to her, I think you mean, of course, they'll be raised Jewish. And I hope we didn't lose Brandon.
I think I'm here.
Oh, here we are. Yeah, there, you're back. So, she said, of course, they're going to be raised Catholic. He said, of course, they're going to be raised Jewish. And that's why they were getting divorced. In fact, at the divorce in New Jersey, even with a negotiated uncontested divorce, you still have to do it in person. So before we're going into the courtroom, they're sitting and catching up on each other's family and everything. You never know this is a couple that's about to go in and finalize the divorce. And she worked in Manhattan. I work in Manhattan. He gave his then ex-wife, because in New Jersey, they divorce you on the spot. You leave with a certified copy of the judgment of divorce. He drove his then ex-wife back to work in Manhattan, let me find another way to get home. So the amazing thing is they dated, lived together, were married a few years, and they never had the conversation of what religion they're going to raise the children.
Phil, I got a great idea. Charles, we can make some money here. I think there's a small little book that with all the questions you should ask your potential significant other before you tie the knot. There should be at least an outlet or a website or something with all those. And then on the same website could be a list of the top reasons why marriages don't work. What you could do before you get married, and here's the reasons why all these people's marriages didn't work.
Right. Yeah. And anecdotal advice on when you are getting married, just like I said, my advice to men is earn your wings every day.
Love it.
And, I practice it. And I would say that most of the happily married men, my parents were the most happily married couple I ever knew for 63 and a half years. And they came from different backgrounds. I mean, they were both Jewish, but my mother came from a wealthy Sephardic family in North Africa. My father came from a poor Ashkenazi family in Manhattan. And so they had a lot of differences in their backgrounds. And yet they were the most happily married couple that I ever knew. And largely because my father did what I just said. Even though he was in the Army, not the Air Force, he earned his wings every day.
Philip, would you say that due to technology, and Brandon made a good point, some anecdotal questions that you can answer. Would you say due to technology that couples today are not taking the path that we took yesteryear as far as seeing your parents, meeting both parents, or going through the questions? Technology has made people just speed up and make things happen quicker, and people get married quicker. They date for a lesser period of time. Do you think there's something to that?
I don't, but I could be wrong. I think that technology often gets the couples together. Um, but you are on the right track with what you said about getting the parents' approval. And it kind of is, well, it's surprising to be, well, my parents, my wife's parents were already deceased when I met her. But I have known a couple of young men, and it's pretty surprising, that went to the parents of their girlfriends before asking their girlfriends to marry them and to get the parents' permission. There are not many out there like that, Charles.
Hmm.
But as a matter of fact, well, my nephew went to his future in-laws before he popped the question and got their blessing, and was still not um, indicating to anybody that they were on the path of getting married. And one time they got out of the car, all of a sudden he dropped on his knees, proposed to her, and gave her the ring. And it is now almost 11 years later, and two children, and they're very happy. So, and I knew one other guy that also went to the parents before he asked the bride. And I don't think it's the technology. I mean, frankly, if I should say it, even if my wife's parents were around at the time, I don't think I would have asked for their permission.
Right, right. Don't know what happened to Brandon there. Brandon,
Brandon,
if
are
you
you
can hear
still
us,
there? We lost you for a
you're
moment
blacked out on the
before.
screen. Okay, but we'll continue. So, Philip,
Sure,
um, we're going to give you kind of a parting shot here before
sure.
we go. My question to you for the audience:
Hmm.
in today's environment, people, we talk through the show, people are still getting married.
Sure,
Uh, People have all their process and procedures
sure.
in
Hmm.
getting married.
Sure.
What would you say? What advice would you give to a young couple today in today's environment, getting married to be able to sustain themselves and have a long, happy 50-year marriage? What advice would you give them based on your experience?
Sure. So, well, I really like Brandon's idea of having a book or something with a lot of questions. Consistent with what Brandon and I have said, I would say to them, have the two of you had those hard questions? Have you had those hard discussions? Like, do you want children? How many do you want? If they're, let's say, different religions, what religion the children are going to be raised in? If you have children, are one of you going to stop working? And if so, for how long? So, yeah, I would tell them have these hard discussions, even if it means, and they may not want to hear this, even if it means that you realize that even though you're crazy about each other, you probably don't really have what it takes to go the distance. And then the rest would be, what I said. If you're really sure about a person, you're not going to be. I guess it's somewhat different from. You asked about no fault grounds and infidelity. I think, and again, this is just anecdotal. I think that infidelity is not the cause of a lot of marriages breaking up. I think it's a symptom. And I have personally seen in divorces that have handled that it wasn't that one of them, and by the way, it's not just the men, not that just one of them had an affair or an extended affair with someone else and that put down the marriage, even though seemingly that's what did it, may have been the catalyst, but that really the marriage was bad before, and that's why either or both of them looked elsewhere.
Yeah, and that's sound advice. And as I mentioned before, I got divorced about 5 years ago, and I can attest to that. We did not go through those questions at all. When my ex mentioned that she did not want to do a prenup, I just said, no problem. I'm not interested. Let's get married. So there's something to that, Brandon, and great advice, Philip. Brandon, you want to add? Philip, you want to add anything before we depart?
Yeah, I would say that if I had been your lawyer at the time and she said she doesn't want to do a prenup, I would say to you, Brandon, as I say to groups, if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, you don't need a lawyer, you need a psychiatrist.
Okay. Great, good advice. Well, Philip.
No, Brandon's the celebrity. You two are the celebrities. Brandon, do you have some parting remarks?
I was going to say, I've written 3 books. I'm working on my 4th book, and my 3rd book, because, I woke up when I was 50. I'm like, I'm a pretty good husband, not a bad dad. I was thinking somehow there's got to be a way to be better. So I did a tremendous amount of research, and when I started my own pod, literally 15 years ago. And what I would do is I go into the bookstore and I'd say, who is the #1 book on relationships? What's the #1 book on how to have more love in your life, how to be a better? And then I would call the authors up. I'm not a big reader. And I'd say, listen, I have this big sports audience, but would you like to come on my pod? And I get the abridged version of everything that they told me. And then every time I met somebody who I thought had a good marriage, and you never fully know who does and doesn't, but would appear to be like an extended long marriage, I'd be like, how you doing this shit? How's this all working for you? And in my 3rd book, Living on Purpose, which most people would think of a sports guy, because my stuff is all business, entrepreneurship, but the one chapter on parenting, which includes also being a better husband, I think is by far my best work. It's gold, because it's not my thoughts. It's all the thoughts I've accumulated from either marriage therapists, and they gave me a couple of go-to. We had a friend that was a marriage therapist tell me, and then I accumulated that. It's all in that one chapter. So I've done 2,500 blogs on BrandonSteiner.com. You can read them, whatever. But the one blog that probably got the most amount of attention was my tip for how to have a good marriage. And that was like the summation of all that data that I had gotten. And I would say good agreements prevent disagreements. So if you have somebody you're trying to partner with that doesn't want to really take the time and etch out and fight through a good agreement, you're going to be screwed when you have a disagreement.
Boy, you two Flatbush guys got it. So it was great to be on the show with you guys.
You grew up in no slouchy area either, so you got some toughness. I know where you grew up, but when you grow up in Brooklyn, that's a degree. When you leave Brooklyn, that's a master's degree. And then there's whatever you go. When you go to school, you get those degrees on top of those degrees. So just growing up in Brooklyn's a degree.
And especially Flatbush, because Flatbush was like one big come-as-you-are party. So
a lot going on.
Yeah, a lot going on.
Well, gentlemen, great having you both on the show. Didn't know you wrote 4 books, Brandon. Thanks for sharing that. And Philip, continued success.
Thank you.
And guys, it's been real. Thanks a lot.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Undiscovered Gems. You heard it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both of you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Gems with our host, Charles D. Smith, highlighting today's best and brightest business minds. Brought to you by Pods Entertainment Group.